This past week in the staff meeting, I was sharing with everybody, and I'll condense this a little bit, how I feel personally that I'm at a place, I need wisdom like I've never needed it before. I guess everybody can appreciate that, right? Considering the times in which we live. But I meant that more in relation to what Beth and I have been called to do as it relates to this congregation. And personally, that I feel that in some respects I've kind of reached a plateau, and I expanded that to the congregation. In some ways, I feel like as a congregation we've kind of reached a plateau. You know, if you've been here from the beginning, we grew real fast, real quick, real big, and people were coming in as fast as we could open the doors, it seemed like. You know, people were coming in every week from different places all over the country, and that's still happening. That's not really the issue so much as it is just wanting to know direction going forward. You know, wanting to know how we proceed from this. And so me personally, just me, I feel like, you know, I've kind of reached a plateau. And if I have, then somehow or another, that's probably going to affect the congregation. A plateau is not necessarily a bad thing because we had to climb up to get there. But we don't want to stay there, right? We want to continue on. So in the course of our discussion in our staff meeting and prayer and, you know, just sharing things that were on our heart, it was brought forward, you know, that when you get to that place, that means you need to evaluate, reassess, maybe try something you haven't done before, look at things a way you haven't looked at them before. And so in the course of today, what I want to share with you, there's some things that I feel like we need to address, some things we need to revisit, some things that we may need to think about looking ahead to the future. So that's kind of, you know, the thoughts behind what I want to share with you today. And these are things that I've been thinking about long time, things that we as a staff have talked about long time. It didn't just come up this week. We've been talking about these things a lot. But it seems to me, that with this Torah portion, the Father kind of set the stage for us to discuss these things. So with that in mind, let's go to Genesis chapter 23, verse 1 and 2, the beginning of this Torah portion, Chaya Sarah, where Sarah lived, or the life of Sarah. But interestingly enough, it's her death that's emphasized right at the very beginning. But at the same time, her death actually sets in motion some things as it relates to Israel's future, things that are conducive to life. So yeah, it begins by telling us about her death, but that her death, it started some things. Traditionally, her death occurred shortly after, some say because of the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah in Genesis chapter 22. She heard that Abraham had left with Isaac, and somehow or another this kind of precipitated her death. That's the tradition. It doesn't tell us that in the scripture, but it is interesting that immediately after what happens in Genesis 22, the next chapter, Sarah dies. So take it for what it's worth. But because he wanted to avoid having that confrontation with Sarah, seeing that he's going to take his son that he loves to the top of a mountain to lift him up to be a burnt offering, that's why many believe that Abraham rose very early in the morning. That's in Genesis chapter 22. And he did that to avoid her, either because he greatly respected her, or maybe he was just afraid of her, or afraid of what she might do, you know, and try to stop it. But the main point here as we begin is her death set things in motion, things that needed to happen. He responded to the situation with an eye on the future. And in so doing, he exhibits godly attributes. He exhibits traits through all the things that he did, things that you and I need to emulate: respect, humility, and a commitment to put things in order, to instill order. An example, when Sarah died, he demonstrated respect for his deceased wife. How? He went out to purchase a piece of property. As it turns out, the first piece of property that Abraham and his seed purchased in the land, kind of setting the stage for other things. But he demonstrated respect for her by purchasing this piece of property. In Genesis chapter 23, beginning in verse 7. Then Abraham stood up and he bowed himself to the people of the land. I want you to take note of that. He bowed himself to the people of the land, the sons of Het, and he spoke with them, saying, if it is your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and meet with Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is at the end of his field, and let him give it to me at the full price as property for a burial place among you. Now that word Machpelah means double. It's supposedly, you can't see it now, but supposedly in those days there was a double compartment within the cave. And of course in time there would be many doubles buried there. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. But the main point here is he's demonstrating respect for his deceased wife. He wants to bury her in proper fashion and not just any place. So he shows her respect, and in doing this, he continues to show respect to others. He honors others, submitting himself to the protocol of that day and time. We just read it. He bowed himself to the people of the land. By the way, these people are not known for their piety. Would you agree? These are idol worshipers. These are the word that we like to use as Messianics, pagans, right? They're heathens. And yet, what does he do? He bows himself before him because he's honoring the protocol. He's respecting those of the land. And so after he comes to them and does this, there's this exchange between Abraham and Ephron the Hittite. I'm not going to read it all. But when you read the narrative, something becomes very, very clear. The Hittite is acting like he wants to be a good guy and do Abraham a big favor, and, I'll just give it to you, which is all a farce. Because as you read this, you see that this man is demonstrating a very false humility. And his true nature is revealed when he tells Abraham, well, here's the price. What is 400 shekels between you and me? It's my understanding that 400 shekels would have purchased an estate for Abraham. So this is a guy who's trying to be nice. He's putting out there this feigned humility. And so you see a feigned humility, a false humility contrasted with Abraham's genuine humility. And his genuine humility is born out of respect. So let me just make a quick statement about false humility. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Things that rub me wrong quicker than a lot of things is somebody who will steal and somebody who will go on and on and on about how humble they are. I cannot stand it because false humility is an example of carnal men twisting a virtue into pride or into sin. Twisting something that's supposed to be good into a sin. I ran across a quote I thought was very interesting. It was written back in 1621. And this particular man's name's Robert Burton, if you're interested, but he says this, quote, they are proud in humility. Proud in that they are not proud. And I thought, Selah. All of this is to say that it is my opinion that Ephron the Hittite is one of those who was so proud that he just oozed with false humility. But on the other hand, we have Abraham demonstrating genuine humility and genuine respect for others, even people, as we say, who didn't have a good reputation as far as pious people or righteous people. And so he's motivated to show proper respect to his deceased wife, and in so doing, he shows respect to Ephron the Hittite, a man of less than noble character. But yet, in spite of that, Abraham shows him honor, the proper honor that was due his position, his authority in the land. And even though I'm sure Abraham knows that he's, getting gouged, he doesn't put up a fight. He doesn't say anything like that. He has a really good attitude about it. Why? Because he was focused on more important issues. What was the more important issue? A proper place to bury his deceased wife. So it wasn't worth haggling over. That was the more important thing. And so we have an example of the man of God is refusing to argue with someone who's obviously trying to take advantage of him, but refuses to argue with him, and instead he bows himself before the people of the land. What's the word for that? Humility, right? Respect, paying honor. In this exchange, we see a person who is willing to take advantage of one and another person who's willing to be taken advantage of. And demonstrating what? There are those who express humility in words, and there are those who express humility in deeds. Now, in this kind of a scenario, some of us wouldn't stand for it. As soon as it looked like they were trying to rip us a new one, we'd be putting up a fight, right? Some might even say that Abraham was being weak. He was just allowing people to push him around, and nobody pushes me around, that kind of a thing. Some people wouldn't be able to resist speaking into this situation, complaining, so this is not right, this is unfair, this is unjust. Was it? Yeah. But what does Abraham do? He doesn't put an argument. Why? Because he has more important issues. There's something that is greater weighing on here. And so he does no such thing. He doesn't fight. He doesn't contend. He doesn't haggle. He exhibits godly character, humility, respect, temperance. And I say that because I have to think that inside he knows this guy's trying to rip me a new one. And most of us might be tempted to say something, but what does he do? He tempers that. And just as a footnote, it's very important in this exchange that we see Abraham willing to concede to the other man's demands. We see a man who is humble and meek, but we should never mistake meekness for weakness. Because Abraham's also the guy who in Genesis chapter 14 took 300 and something guys and whipped 4 kings and their armies. So don't mistake meekness for weakness. Again, in this scenario, Abraham is considering what is more important. And because he is focused on what is more important here, he submits to protocol. He humbles himself. And in so doing, by purchasing this cave, he sets things in motion for the future. And so, yeah, he took some guff, if we can put it that way, but it's because he's got an eye on the future. He is seeing a bigger picture, a more important picture. Now, in that vein of thought, I want you to look at the notion that Sarah's death, as I said at the very beginning, kind of put things in motion. Her death motivated Abraham to find a wife for Isaac. I mean, he's getting on in years too. So her death, it seems that it provoked him. It's time to find a wife for Isaac. Something really important happened, and when that happened, it spurred him into action. And so he continues this process of setting certain things in order because he knows the season is now to do this. We need to address this, and Isaac needs a wife. And so he begins to do things with an eye on the future so that God's purpose might continue. In chapter 24, verse 1. Now Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And so Abraham said to the oldest servant of his house, who ruled over all that he had, "Please put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for my son Isaac." And so the purpose, of course, for not marrying his son to the daughters of the land is because he wanted to avoid the influence of their gods and their ways. He didn't want that to be introduced into his family. So even though he demonstrates respect and honor, follows their protocol, that doesn't mean he wants to be like them. He doesn't want to be like them. And so he makes his servant swear that you will not let my son marry from the daughters of the land. He insists that Isaac must not be led astray by the women of the land. In fact, later on, Isaac is going to insist upon the same thing for Jacob. Now, Esau, he's a whole different story. He caused his mom and dad a lot of grief. But Isaac also tells Jacob, don't take a wife from the daughters of the land. So the point here is this. Sarah's death provoked action that factored very importantly in God's plan for his people Israel. And so as it is always the case, the end of one cycle, the end of one season simultaneously begins another season. Death, in this case the death of Sarah, is often the seed from which new life springs. Yeshua said, unless a grain of wheat goes into the ground to die, what won't happen? It won't produce any fruit, right? Methuselah's death prompted Noah to enter the ark. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but the day that Methuselah died is the same day that Noah and his family went into the ark. Our death to sin gives way to our resurrection to new life. So again, death is often the seed from which springs new life. Something very important, even tragic, can happen. And when it happens, yes, you address it. But it also, in some cases, should provoke you to look to set things in order for the sake of the future. Now, I don't mean this with any disrespect towards Sarah, but there are things about us, me, you, all of us. There are things about us that just need to die. They just need to die and be buried, right? Habits, attitudes, traits, some traits that we may have relied on in times past and become proud of in times past, but traits that can, if we're not careful, plague us and impede us from becoming the person, the man, the woman, the people that God wants us to be. And so there are some things that just need to die. The problem for me, and I think a lot of us, if not all of us, is that these old traits are, they're just old familiar friends. And in a time of crisis or despair or disappointment, discouragement, whatever you want to call it, these old traits are just old familiar friends that we can run to. And they'll coddle us, and pat us on the head and all those kinds of things. It's not your fault. God understands. That kind of thing. And we know that. We know that. So, we'll come to our senses and then we'll set those things aside temporarily, and then something will happen and they pop up again. Some things about us just need to die and not be resurrected. When we boil all these things down to their base element, you know what it is? Self. The biggest idol in our pantheon. Self. Now, in juxtaposition to Ephraim's selfishness, his greed, his lack of consideration. Oh, by the way, we could throw Lavan into the mix here too, because he makes an appearance in this Torah portion. What prompts him to run out to meet the servant? Oh, the stuff, right? So we could throw him into this as well. In contrast to that, this portion shines a light on respect, humility, honor, consideration of others, and responding to the need to set things in proper order. And all these are among the attributes that Abraham exhibited in this portion, but throughout his life. And so then, if that is the example we get from Abraham, then as Abraham's seed, right, you and me, shouldn't we aspire to exhibit these same kinds of attributes? Humility, even when standing before people who are less than noble. Respect, honor, these kinds of things. Being willing to submit to the expected protocol. All these different things that he exhibited. So, in kind of formulating all these thoughts, this parable come to mind, and I wanted to share it with you. I know you've heard it before. It's in Luke chapter 14, beginning at verse 7. So he told a parable to those who were invited. When he noted how they chose the best places, he's at a shindig, And he sees people wanting to, kind of carve out the best spot for themselves. So he said to them, when you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him, and he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man. Bill's translation, you're going to have to move, pal. Give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. You've just been embarrassed. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, I want us to put on our thinking caps here. What would you say that the characteristics are in the former, the person who went to the best place and had to move? What are some traits they exhibit there? Pride, okay. Haughty, all right. What? Self-important, okay. Here are the two words, because I know we could go on and on and on, but here are the two words that I put down in my notes. Presumptuous and haughty. What does it mean to be presumptuous? It means to show little respect for others by doing things you have no right to do. Disrespecting others by doing things you have no right to do. What does it mean to be haughty? I know we know this. It means to be arrogant, superior, disdainful of boundaries and protocol. Rules don't apply to me. Now, have you ever met those people? The rules apply to everybody but them, right? We can set up boundaries and set up rules, but somehow or another it escapes them. Oh, you were talking to me too? That's the kind of person who went and sat down in the chief place, right? Interestingly enough, there is an example of this kind of person in the Haftarah. My wife was very insightful, and she pointed this out to me. In 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5 and 6. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. And his father had not rebuked him at any time. Now, if you read the rest of the story, maybe you know the rest of the story, one can see the chaos that people can create when they act presumptuously, when they have no consideration for proper boundaries and protocol, when they're haughty. They can create a lot of chaos. It's also interesting to see that his father, the king, had failed to correct him. None of us, or very few of us anyway, myself included, like to be told no. We don't like that, do we? Especially when we really, really want something and we get the response, no. Very few of us really like boundaries that limit what we want to do. Boundaries are good for everybody else. But I don't want to be limited, I don't want the rules to apply to me. These are things that we have to wrestle with. At one level or the other, it's true. Some people demonstrate it, act out on it differently, but we all, to some degree or another, we struggle with this. But look at what happens when we don't possess the godly attributes that we see in Abraham's life. Look at what happens if we're very hesitant to correct those who are under our supervision. Children, grandchildren, what have you. When we're not willing to take no or respect boundaries, or when we're not willing to reinforce those boundaries and correct those who need that, we are risking setting the stage for an Adonijah to exalt himself. And then chaos ensues. Do you think that there's order in New York City today? Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, Los Angeles, California, London, any of these places? Do you think there's order there? No, what is there? It's chaos. Why? Because there are people who don't think the rules apply to them, number one, and there are people who govern these places who don't have the, whatever word you want to fill in right there, to tell them no, and then to back it up. We don't want that, do we? So then, Messiah in the parable said that this first man, he sought to exalt himself in the presence of others. He called attention to himself. He sure did. He called so much attention to himself that he was shamed and embarrassed in front of all these people because he wanted to call attention to himself. And so it was with Adonijah. And of course, later on, things got even more disagreeable for Adonijah. He ended up dead. Back to the parable in Luke. I want you to consider some of the attributes that are exhibited by the second person, the person who sat in the lesser seat, but who is brought to a better seat. What's some of the attributes that we could say this person exhibits? Humility is one. Unassuming. Patience. Anybody else? Here's some that I jotted down. Humility was one. Respect for others. Protocol comes to mind. Understanding where he's at and how things are supposed to work. And not thinking so highly of himself that he submits to the order of things. Having a modest or a low view of one's own importance. Let's meditate on that for just a second. Realizing that it's not all about me. We sing, it's all about you. But then sometimes all of us struggle with it being all about me, right? That's self. And every human being, as long as we're in this corruptible, mortal body, we're going to, in some form or fashion, we're going to struggle with that. Do you agree or disagree? How many of you agree? Let me see your hands. Let me see who's with me. How many of you disagree that it's all about you? Duly noted. Being modest and having a low view of one's own importance is very important. To have respect and to appreciate protocol is to have this admiration or this appreciation for someone or something due to their abilities, their qualities, their achievements, even their authority. And this is the person that God exalts in due season. Romans chapter 12, verse 3. Everyone who's among you are not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly. And if that means you're to think soberly and you're not thinking so highly of yourself, to think highly of yourself means you're intoxicated with something. Self. Philippians 2, verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Prefer others before yourself. That's everybody's attained that lofty goal, I know, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 16 through 18. Do not boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment, but he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. For not he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. My translation of that is, if we feel like the rules don't apply to us, they may apply to everybody else. There are people who, they try to kind of cut to the head of the line. You ever been in one of those long lines waiting to buy a ticket or whatever it is? And then somebody that gets there an hour after you do has a friend up at the front of the line, and they don't think that they have to stand in line like anybody else, and they go cut in line. What does that do to you, Bob Davis? Don't answer that question. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Well, this is kind of, I think, in a way, maybe in an apples and oranges way, but this is the kind of thing that Paul's talking about. We're not to be like that. And we're not to boast about ourselves. And, and especially if we're trying to make us seem more important than somebody who actually has achieved something. If we're going to boast, if you're going to glory, let him glory in the Lord. All right, so what is my point in all of this? Everything in the life of a believer boils down to this. Love God with all of your being and treat your fellow man in the way that you want to be treated. Right? Everything boils down to that. In short, put God and others ahead of self. So on that note, I'm going to take this opportunity, based on these things that we've talked about from the Torah portion, and kind of springboard from that to address some things that I feel like as a congregation we need to revisit, some things that we need to consider, some things that we need to correct. Also, there are some things that have happened in the world recently that demand that we take note of and pay attention to and set some things in motion for the future. So I want you to receive this as loving instruction. I want you to receive this as tidying up a few loose ends. I want you to receive this as reaffirming some things that we already know, but also setting some things in order for the future that God's purpose for us may continue. Because if we as a congregation have plateaued, then there's something the Father wants us to get squared away, straightened out, set in place, whatever terminology you want to use, because I don't think we stop here. But if he's given us time to kind of, my words, plateau, so to speak, then maybe there are some things that we need to assess, reassess, revisit, what have you. So then, as we do this, I want you to, first of all, know that this isn't just, Bill spouting off. I've talked with the staff. I've talked with the tribe leaders and the elders. And they're behind me. They support me on this. Okay? And if tribe leaders, elders, staff, if I have misspoken on your behalf, please stand up now and call me on it. Let the record note. So this is coming from leadership, okay? So please understand that. I want you to think of someone you truly admire, someone you truly respect, dead or alive, and it was a notable person of high regard and who had character and whose position and their character is worthy of someone's respect. Maybe a political leader. I know that's going to be rare. Maybe somebody, a royal, something like that, a business, somebody that you look at that person and they're kind of the diamond in the rough, so to speak. They stand out. And it's somebody you admire, somebody you respect. And I want you to imagine that that person invites you and your family to join them at a very, very special event. This is not just to have a hot dog. This has come to, this is going to be something really special, really nice. And so they invite you and your family. So considering the environment that there may be other dignitaries there, people that are, notable people. In considering that environment, I want to ask you some questions. In that environment, would you be particular about if you were to speak? Would you be particular about when to speak? More specifically, would you be more particular about what you spoke? Would you be more particular about how you behaved? Even what you wore? If you were going to go meet the leader of a nation, I doubt very seriously you'd wear a t-shirt and cutoffs, right? Maybe some would, but they don't get invited back, right? So do you understand what I'm posing to you? There are certain situations that we understand demands a little bit more from us, right? And we're going to be a little more particular about some things. If you were invited along with your family to one of these events and functions, might you press your children to be better behaved here than they may be at home? Come on. All my life as a kid, I heard from my parents, now when we get here, you better mind your manners and you better straighten up, and because if you don't, 'cause when we get home, and we told our kids that too. Whoever heard that growing up? Who's ever said that to your kids? Because there are certain situations, it requires that we all are going to have to behave just a little bit better than what we might otherwise. Who agrees with me? All right. So if you would do those things in that particular scenario, I want you to ask yourself why. Why would you do that? Here's some words that come to mind. Respect. Right? You would respect that person, that situation. In certain environments, you know that you have to honor a certain protocol. You just don't barge into the Oval Office and say, hey, Joe, I want to talk to you. That don't happen, does it? You don't just show up at Buckingham Palace, and walk past that guard who doesn't move and just say, I'd like to see the king. It doesn't happen, does it? So there's respect. There's honoring protocol. And here's a big one. All those things are attached to this one. Humility. We keep coming back to that. Humility. Humility goes hand in glove with wisdom, by the way. Now, if you would not do these things in that particular scenario, I want you to ask yourself why you would not. I'm going to suggest to you that if you did not, if you or me or anyone refused to act properly or in the way that was expected of us, would likely be escorted out. At the very least, we would not be invited back. Would you agree? And so then there are certain situations, there are certain environments that demand that we act in an appropriate manner, in the expected manner. Some situations demand that we make adjustments to how things are done. So then, I'm sure you have caught my drift. When it comes to this congregation, we have to do the same thing from time to time, right? You do that in your family, I would assume. There are certain times that you say, well, it's time we need to sit down. We need to talk about a few things because we've been busy as parents and we feel like some things are getting out of hand and we need to kind of come back around the table. We need to sit down and address some things. Agreed? And why do we do that? Because we love one another, right? And we want to see the best for each other. So when it comes to this congregation, when we come together in this room, in this place, we have consecrated this place as a space where we worship. Agreed. Now, I know this is not the temple, and it doesn't rise to that level of sanctity. I get that in terms of how men view things. But if his presence is here, is it not a holy place? He told Moses, take off your shoes. Out in the middle of the desert, on the side of a mountain, out the rocks and dust, take your shoes off. The ground you're walking on is holy. What made that ground holy? Not where it was, but because of who was there. Do we agree? So you and I collectively, and all those folks who join us out there, we have come together and agreed to consecrate this place as a place of worship. So should we not consider this to be his house? And if it's his house, then he is the host. And if he is the host, should we not conform to his standards and follow his protocol? Talking to me too. Should we not regard this as his house and he is our host and we are obliged to conform to his standards, his way of doing things, the protocol that he sets down? In fact, shouldn't we go above and beyond what we would normally do in any other kind of a situation? Should we or shouldn't we? All right. In short, shouldn't we show him more respect and honor than we would others? I know that everybody agrees with that. I know everybody agrees. Yes, absolutely. Amen. Do we? We believe we should, but do we? Okay? I believe we do, but I believe we need to be better. Okay? Is that all right? I believe we do, but we need to be better. And why do we need to be better? Because what was okay yesterday is not okay today. And what's okay today may not be okay tomorrow. And if he wants us to continue on, and we know he does, then he is going to continually challenge us to be a little bit more set apart today than we were yesterday. And tomorrow he's going to expect that we strive to be a little more set apart tomorrow than we are today. And that's just how it's going to be until we see him face to face. And we don't have to deal with this corruptible mortal flesh, right? So let's begin with the issue of respect. Respecting God and respecting each other. Everybody who's part of this congregation shares in the responsibility to regard his house as a house of worship. Now, because of our circumstances, this also has to double as a place where we fellowship and break bread and, socialize. And we've had to do that from day one. Who remembers the days on Inman when we'd have the service, and right after the service, we'd clear everybody out, put chairs and tables out there, and then we'd have to take up the tables and chairs and move everybody out so we could have the midrash. How many of you remember those days? All right? So if you're thinking, well, this place is small, you have to do all these kinds of things, and you have to go upstairs. Hey, you should have been there at the beginning, all right? So my point is, we've set this place and consecrated this place as where we come and worship, but we also fellowship here. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we need to be able to distinguish, we need to be willing to distinguish when it's time to socialize from when it's time to worship. Because the worship's supposed to be set apart from all the socializing. Now that's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And I think most of you would agree with that, right? Okay? Well, this is one of those areas I think we need to work on a little bit. Now, this doesn't sound like a teaching. This sounds like a rebuke. No, it's instruction, right? Based on what we see in the scripture, all right? So we need to be better about distinguishing when it's time to socialize and when it's time to worship, and especially considering that we're such a large group of people in a very small area. Look, I wish that we had just plenty of room and everybody, didn't have to be on top. I pray for that. Maybe I'm going to believe that that's where God's going to take us. But maybe before he takes us there, he wants us to get some things in proper order. Right? Me too, starting with me. So we're a large group of people, we're in a small area, and the circumstances just require us to adjust to our present environment. And so one way we need to be better is, I want you to do this for me. I want you everybody to listen to me very carefully. I want you to work on suspending conversation about trivial things once the service has started. When we come together and we pray and we sing Matovu and we sound the shofar, that's a pretty good indication that the service has started. And that is our cue to stop talking about whatever it was we were talking about before, right? I don't think that's unreasonable. I think it honors the Lord to be willing to suspend whatever we had going on when the worship begins. Who agrees with me? Let me see your hands. Okay. All right, who disagrees with me? Let me see your hands. I want to get you some straps or rope or something like that. I don't know what it is. She raised her hand both times. Can't be double-minded, Diana. If you have a conversation that you just have to have, whether it's with somebody or on the phone, take it outside. Okay? Take it outside. Now, I don't mean just outside that door, because there are people still coming in, trying to get in the service. I don't want you to take it out there in the hallway. I want you to take it outside. What if it's raining? Take it in the foyer. Not here. Okay? That's not just Bill. I just think that is what he would expect of us. Where's Howard Dahl? If we lived in the days of the temple, and we went up to the temple, were there certain expectations of how you behave yourself once you get there? Absolutely. And if you didn't behave yourself the way you were supposed to behave, would they just say, would you not do that? Or might it get a little bit more, a lot more serious? That's what, exactly right. All right. So I want you to let us all be better about suspending conversations. If you get a phone call and you have to take it out there. All right? Why? Because it's about respect. It's about respect. Reverence. Adults, young people, service is not the appropriate time for disruptive dialogue. While worship is going on, carrying on a conversation is not only disrespectful to one another, it's disrespectful, in my heart, it's disrespectful to God. Adults, our young people are watching us. They're going to replicate our example. And so if you're out there jawing while worship is going on, then you don't have any right to say anything to them when they're out there jawing while worship is going on. No. We need to lead properly. Let's not be so oblivious to the fact that your conversation that has nothing to do with what's going on in the service is very likely a distraction to somebody else who's really trying to be part of the service. While I'm walking the tightrope, let's go ahead. I want those who have a tendency to frequently go in and out of the service. Notice I said frequently, okay? To the bathroom, I suppose, I don't know, but I want you to keep in mind that if you're continually in and out, back and forth, that has the potential to be a distraction to others, okay? Now, I understand sometimes we have to go out. We have to go to the men's room. We have to go to the ladies' room. Little one gets out of hand. We have to take them outside. I understand all that stuff happens. I'm not saying you can't go in and out. You know what I'm talking about. Those who have a tendency to frequently get up and go out, just keep in mind that you are potentially distracting others. And young people, please don't use the bathroom as an excuse to go chat with your friends. If the service is going on, please. I want everybody to be mindful of the fact that what we do, while it might be convenient to us, it might be inconsiderate of others. Who's still with me? 1, 2, 3, 4. Parents, if you notice that it is your child doing this, or your husband, if they're doing this way too often, too frequently, please do me a favor, say something. Well, I never see my kids after they get here. Oh, that might be a problem. Because you remember, a long time ago, we thought it might be a good idea if we start learning as families to sit together again. If you don't know where your child is and what they're doing, address it. I understand that on Shabbat especially, we have a long service. We make a day of it. Some people who've come and visited is like, man, y'all are here a long time. Yeah, we are. We make a day of it. And it's a long service in very tight quarters. And everyone, including our children, you do a great job. You do a really good job. Parents, you have done a really good job with your children because they're sitting there and they're little guys, and kids are going to be kids. And we have lots of young people. We have lots of children. And that is a very, very good sign. That is a sign of something that's alive and something that's thriving. And you've done a great job. We have wonderful children. There are little ones that every week without fail, they come and give me a hug. Some of them 3, 4, 5 times in one day. And they give me notes and they color things for me and they tell me jokes. Is that right, Ellie? We have precious little ones here. And we have wonderful teens and preteens and young adults. And so that's a great thing. And so we get all these people in here. We're here for a long time, and it's tight quarters. And, I understand that kids are going to be kids. Babies are going to cry. Kids are going to get the wiggles, as Beth says. They're going to need a snack or what have you. I understand all of that. And we still want to stay together for worship. We don't want to separate like some people do and take the kids out there and get them out of it. No, we don't want that. We want to be together as a family. So I understand that. I appreciate it. How many times have you heard me call somebody down about a crying baby? Never. Never. Because babies do what babies do. Children do what children do. But we also need parents to do what parents do. Am I okay so far? All right. Here's the goal, ladies and gentlemen, to better exhibit respect and consideration to the Father and to each other. I'm not saying that we haven't done it. I'm saying I want us to be better at it. Can you receive this? All right. Please, let's curtail any unnecessary, notice that word? Unnecessary up and down, in and out, that becomes distractive to others. If you need to excuse yourself and go to the facilities, don't hold it. Please, don't hold it. But you understand what I'm saying. I hope you do anyway. And this applies to everyone, not just our kids. So moms, dads, grandparents, great-grandparents, help us. Continue helping us. Continue doing what you have done. And so many of you have been so wonderful at it. But let's continue to be better at that. And this same attention to respect and order needs to be demonstrated not only during the service, but during Oneg as well, and after the Midrash. Now, obviously, it's a far less formal time than when we're having the service, but we're going to still need to remain attentive. And here's why. Because we've had some things happen several times recently, things that are causing us to say, wait a minute, we need to pay attention to some things here. Okay? And for reasons beyond what I'm going to share with you right now. Don't get so involved in your conversation with that person. And my wife, I think, is the one who said it the other day. When ours were little, and she was with them all the time, she was like, anytime she would see an adult, she's like, oh, an adult. Can I talk to the adult? You know? And so we get that. But let's just make sure that we don't get so involved in our conversation with those others that you don't know where your children are and you don't know what they're doing. Okay? Please. I'm not saying this without cause. Because we've had incidents where unattended small children were not out in the hallway. They were headed outside. Okay? Thankfully, we had people who realized that there's a problem here, and they took it upon themselves to remedy the problem. Okay? I understand that kids, small kids especially, are like ninjas. You know, they're right there. You turn around, whoop, they're gone, you know. Next thing you know, they're dropping out of the ceiling, you know. I get it. I get it. But God forbid that we ever have that one time when something went wrong, right? We want to do our part. So I'm not saying we haven't done that. I want us to be better at it. Okay? I want us to come up a little higher in our duty and our acknowledgement of responsibility. We've had things happen that have scared us, have bothered us. And this is a safety concern. This is a security risk. And we're going to talk about security in just a little bit because, as I said at the beginning, sometimes things happen that cause you to say, we have to assess some things and set some things in motion looking ahead to the future. Okay? Now, I know that kids are going to need to let off a little steam. I get it. I get antsy. You know, I understand that. They're going to need to let off a little steam. Unfortunately, this is not a playground, you know, and there are things that they could get hurt on. There are times when, especially some of our seniors, were in harm's way when our children were getting the wiggles out. So we just need to be a little more careful, okay? And so I'm going to ask you to please, mom, dad, grandparents, great-grandparents, help us in instructing the children after we're done or during Oneg. They're free to move around, but let's try not to run. because we've had too many close calls. All right? Oh, this seems like a petty little thing to deal with on Shabbat. Well, you're here. This is when I get to talk to you. And remember where we're at. Okay? So is that too much to ask? Parents, is that too much to ask? Okay? I don't want your kids getting hurt. I don't want some of our seniors getting hurt. I don't want anybody getting hurt. So help us out with that. So all you little ones, help me, okay? Don't be running. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want anybody else to get hurt. Okay? That is a potential hazard to you and to others. And I want this to be very, very clear. I am not ignoring the fact that kids are going to be kids. I get it. And things happen, and there's always, let's let things be the exception, not the rule, I guess. All right? Let's continue to be our brother's keeper. Which means this: moms, dads, grandparents, great-grandparents. If for some reason, for a moment you're distracted and your child is running, we will be your brother's keeper. Okay? We're going to help in that regard. Doesn't mean we're going to take over your job. It just means we're going to help. Because if we see danger, folks, we need to speak up. And sometimes, and especially in the world we have today, there's a lot of potential dangers out there. Well, the Lord will take care of it. Yeah, I believe that. He's our first line of defense. But guess what? He still expects us to do what we're supposed to do, right? All right? In the Torah, he says if you've got a house and you got a roof, it's your responsibility to put a fence on that roof so that nobody falls off, because if you don't do that and they fall off, you're liable. That's in the Torah. All right? All right, I know it's getting on in the afternoon. I realize that, and I'm trying to be respectful of your time, but I feel like it was important to do these things. So again, let's just be respectful of his house, one another. Let's keep in mind, if we were going up to Jerusalem to enter his sanctuary, how would we do it? What would be expected of us? We'd have to immerse ourselves in a mikveh, right? We'd have to do these things. We would have to be responsible and pay attention to certain things. Protocol is the next thing here, because protocol maintains proper order and it promotes honor and it promotes respect. And so with that, I'm now going to get into something that risks me offending a bunch of people, if I haven't already. We've got a little bit of a problem, and that is we have a large group of people in a relatively small space. Now, Beth and I have been told from day one, oh, that's a good problem to have. Yeah, well, it's still a problem. It still has its challenges. And I am longing for the day. Nobody wants it more than me and Beth and the staff to have a bigger place where a lot of these things that we have to deal with are no longer an issue. But until then, we're just going to have to work with what we have the best way we know how. Now, so here is where I'm going to get on the tightrope again. And I'm going to have to walk a real tightrope here. We have a team of people. I'm not using these people as an example. We have a team of people who love to worship with flags and banners. Orlette Rhodes is leading up that team right over there. But have you noticed that we don't do flags and banners on Shabbat? Can you imagine why? You have a good idea why? Right? Here's why. No room. Because if we did that, is it a viable and an important form of worship? Absolutely. But if we did that in here, we'd be setting off sprinklers, and everybody be wet. Somebody gets slapped in the face a time or two, right? We'd be encroaching on one another. So limited space means that we have to adjust to how we do things. From the very beginning of Jacob's tent, where have the dancers danced? In a corner? No. I'm going to get you a gag, too. They had to make adjustments because of our environment. We got over here, they thought we're going to have plenty of space, and now they go. I didn't do it the exact same way. Our environment creates a need for a certain protocol and practices in our service. There's absolutely nothing wrong with flags. I enjoy watching it, the banners, but it's not going to work in this environment. It's just not going to work. Unfortunately, that same thing is true with some other expressions of worship, certain instruments of worship. I'm on that tightrope. During the praise and worship part of our service, there are those of us who like to express worship with other musical instruments. And I'm mainly going to address percussive instruments. I think that's the right word, percussive. Percussive instruments are great. However, here's the reality. They have the potential to be a distraction to others. So I have to ask you to consider a few things, and that is, if, nothing wrong with wanting to express your worship that way, but first and foremost, consider your neighbor. Consider your neighbor. You may be having a great time. They may be over there wishing hateful things about you. Consider your neighbor, those in your immediate area, but in some regard, we have to consider our live stream audience, because you have microphones over here. And you know why those microphones are there? Because they wanted to hear you say Shabbat Shalom. They wanted to hear you say Shabbat Shalom to them, and they want to hear you sing. They want to be as much a part of this as they can, not being here. As Beth was saying, there are people that are desperate to have fellowship. And so to the best we know how, we're going to try to make them part of what's going on. So, but that does pose this problem. Sometimes instruments, certain types of instruments, percussive instruments, because they tend to resonate a little bit more than others, and they can dominate. And we've had instances where somebody was right under a microphone, and the live stream audience, that's what they heard predominantly. They weren't able to hear the music. I know you didn't know that, but that's why I'm telling you. Okay? So we need to be considerate of our neighbor. We need to be considerate of our praise and worship team, our musicians. And don't y'all leave me hanging. You may not realize it, but if you play your instrument too loudly, or you're not keeping time, that can be a huge distraction. And it makes it harder for the worship team. Okay? There have been times that they have struggled with this. And this goes back months. They've been waiting for me to talk about this. But I'm just not the kind of person that rushes into something. I have to think about it, process it a while, and pray. How do you want me to handle this? And what's the proper way to do this? But there have been times that they've struggled. So here is what I want to say. If you did not practice with the praise team this morning, don't try to help them. Don't try to learn the song on the fly, okay? Now, notice I didn't say you should not bring your instrument, because I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to discourage anyone in their freedom of worship. I want us all to be free to worship, okay? So did you hear me? I didn't say don't bring your instrument. What I'm saying is we can't allow our freedom to infringe on someone else. We need to respect one another, be considerate of one another. So I'm not saying you can't have your instrument. I'm just saying you're going to have to be responsible with your instrument. And some of you have, and I'm not going to call names, but there's some of you who have been very respectful in how you've dealt with this, and you've not allowed it to become a distraction. Some are energetic. At Sukkot, we had this one dear brother, love him to death. He's very energetic with his instrument. And one service, that's all I heard, was his instrument. And he was having a great time. He was praising the Lord. I don't know what happened that service, but he was praising the Lord. All right? And I'm not going to say anything about this. But going forward, we just need to be respectful of one another. So everyone needs to consider others as you express your personal worship, whether it's flags, shofars, instruments, whatever it is. Don't let our worship be an unnecessary distraction for our neighbor's worship. Let's be considerate. Let's use discretion. Let's be more attentive to how and when we use these instruments, especially when we're being led by our praise team up here. In other words, let's be a symphony, not a cacophony. You know what a cacophony is? Noise. Indiscriminate noise. Because we're supposed to offer a sweet savor unto the Lord. Okay. Well, what about the shofars? What about them? Yeah, what about them? You know what? The watchmen meet every week, and they practice, and they also give instruction in proper etiquette. There is a time and a place for everything. And so the watchmen try to blend with and complement what's going on, not to compete with or overpower. And I'm not saying anybody's tried to compete or overpower. I'm just saying sometimes in our enthusiasm, we need to be considerate. All right? So when Paul was writing to the Corinthian church, there were some things that were going on there, and he, as a leader, he wrote him a letter with the intention of establishing certain protocol in their services. People were wanting to use their gifts, and there's nothing wrong with people wanting to use their gifts. That's why God gave them to the body, so that they could be used. But the problem was that some of them were wanting to use them all at the same time. And it wasn't a symphony. It was the other. So he does not discourage them using their gifts. He just encouraged them to use them in proper order. And he says this in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 32 and 3. The spirit of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. And so that's what we're striving to do here. Not to discourage anyone. I don't want to discourage parents. I don't want to discourage grandparents. I don't want to discourage children. I don't want to discourage teens. I don't want to discourage anybody from worshiping freely. That's not what we're trying to do here. But we want to encourage one another to continue growing in our faith. And part of that is to show and to continue to show the proper respect to him and his house and to one another. What's the two commands? Love God, love your fellow man, and deference to yourself, right? So in everything we do, there needs to be proper etiquette, protocol, that we may have order. Yes, there are times that we will get out of sequence. There are some times that I feel like the Lord is asking me or prompting me to say this or say that, and we change up. We're not creating chaos. We're just going to be led by the Spirit, okay? But even as we're led by the Spirit, there is still this demand that he places upon us to do everything decently and in order. Everybody still with me here? Who's still with me? Raise your hand. Okay. So that brings me to this point here. From time to time, there may be those who feel like they have received a word from the Lord and they want to share that, or they feel like they're supposed to share that with the congregation. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's very scriptural. But it is also very scriptural to make certain that everything is done decently and in order. So here's what we want to make sure we don't allow to happen. Even if we feel like we have something from the Lord, it is not proper to disrupt what the Lord is doing at that moment. It is proper, if you feel like this is something that the Lord put on your heart to share, a scripture, a word, what have you, then I want you to do this. This is the protocol. If that happens, then you find an elder, you find a pastor, and you say, I feel like the Lord has put this on my heart. And let them judge that. And if they judge it, if their spirit agrees with what he's placed in your spirit, if there's witness there, then we'll bring that forward to the congregation. Why would we do such as that? Well, he's just trying to quench the spirit. No, I'm not. We're trying to establish order. Well, this seems like a petty thing to get into. Let me tell you something. It's the little foxes that spoil the vine. And we probably need to reassess some things so that the Father can continue to take us on this journey. Whether you believe that or not, that's where I'm coming from. All right? So to avoid confusion, let's do this. Confusion is not our friend. It's an ally to chaos. And chaos is what the world wants right now. That's what the world's embroiled in. And that brings me to my final point, preparing for the chaos. When I mentioned earlier that we need to be better and even more attentive to where our children are, what they're doing, so that we don't have a little one escaping out the front door and be outside. That's a safety concern, but it's also a security issue. And safety is going to be very important, and security is going to be very important. We've always been security conscious here, always. We've had security personnel from day one. And as soon as we could afford it, we put cameras wherever we were. You know why those cameras were there? Not to be Big Brother. I am not interested in getting into everybody's business. But the reason we have those cameras there in Inman, the reason they're up here, is accountability, and security. And I'm not going to tell you everything, but I will just tell you that we go to great lengths to make sure to try to keep you as safe as we know how. There are people here doing that so that you don't have to worry about that, so that you don't have to worry about your children being in a dangerous situation. That being said, we still have a responsibility to make sure that we're being attentive to where they're at, what they're doing, even our teenagers, even our young adults, because we're living in a crazy world now. Okay? I know you're being long-suffering with me here. I appreciate that, understand that, and I'm not going to try to keep you much longer. But there are some things that we really need to get out here before we dismiss. By the end of the year, we want to have a family meeting without our children to talk about some of these things as it relates to security and going forward, because I'm convinced that October 7th is kind of like 9/11. The next day, the world was different. And we may not realize it just yet, but it's a different world now. It's a totally different world now. And we need to not stick our heads in the sand. Well, the Lord will take care of everything. I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, again, he's our first line of defense. But he gave us a brain and he gave us duties. When Adam was placed in the garden, he was told to tend it. And what else? Guard it. And why would he tell him to guard it if the Lord could just take care of it in the first place? Because he's teaching us something here, that what he's entrusted to us is not only worth tending and maintaining and providing for, but it's also worth fighting for and defending, right? So we want to have a family meeting to talk about security issues. Until then, know where your children are. Know where they're at. When they're here, yeah, this is supposed to be a safe place, but still know where your children are. Know where your children are doing. We don't want people just, wandering off. I hate to point this out, but, unlike most churches in this area, we get together on Saturday. We get together on Shabbat. And some of you walk in with tzitzit and prayer shawls and kippot and shofars and, all that Jewish stuff. All right, that's the world we live in today. So we need to not live in fear, but we need to be aware of what's going on around us. So I've been trying to think all morning, how can I end this on a kind of a positive note? And I hope I have not come across as negative or being negative. I hope I'm coming across as just really wanting to lovingly challenge us to be better at some things. I hope that I accomplished that. But I want to and I know the live stream people probably checked out a long time ago because this.
No, they haven't. They're texting.
Oh, they were texting you? All right. I want to end this on a positive note. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24 and 5. This is a message for me and all the leaders of our congregation. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility, correcting those who are in opposition. And I don't see anyone as being in opposition. I don't see anybody as being in opposition, but I do feel like it was time to reaffirm some things that we already knew, to correct some things that in our busyness that we kind of got a little slack, but also to plan for things because some things have happened. Sarah's died, and now it's time to set some things in motion as we look to the future so that God's purposes can continue. So I'm instructed to be gentle, I'm instructed to be patient, and I'm instructed to be humble. Here are some scriptures for you. In Proverbs 9, verse 9, it says that a wise man will receive instruction. Why? In order to grow in wisdom.
Amen. Amen.
A righteous man will desire teaching because he wants to grow in understanding. So I want you to take that in the spirit that it's intended. Proverbs 15, verse 31 says that whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise. Will be at home among the wise. Abraham's godly attributes, that humility, respect, honor, commitment to set things in order, that demonstrates he was a very wise man. And we are called the seed of Abraham. And so I want us to be wise in all that we do. Okay? So again, this isn't a rebuke. This is a challenge for us to be better at things because we don't live in the same world that we did a month ago. Amen? Can you receive this?